Today, only one of these 12 crew members of the Enola Gay lived to tell the story. I'm joined by that man today, Theodore Van Kirk. So if you could now, take us through the steps of that fateful day.
Well, that day wasn't the important day because the bomb was dropped by 9:15 and 8:15 in the morning, Tinian time, 9:15 Tinian time, 8:15 Hiroshima time. So it was all over by then. But the day before was the important day because you have to go back and realize what happened during this period. The bomb was developed by the Manhattan Project. There were hundreds of thousands of people working on the Manhattan Project. They built 3 cities, here in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and Hanford, Washington, just to research how to make the bombs and make the materials then from which to make the bombs. So this effort had been going on a long time, ever since the beginning of the war, when Einstein wrote a letter to Franklin Roosevelt saying that it might be possible to make an atomic weapon. So all this had been going on, and we had started preparing to drop the atom bomb in the fall of 1944 before we even had a bomb. We were, if you were a poker player, you'd say you're betting on the come. So that's what happened. And then they had a test of one of the first atomic bombs in Alamogordo, New Mexico, on July 16th of 1945. After that, everything started getting hotter and everything of that type. And we knew we were going to have a weapon to drop, so then we had to we had already been preparing to drop it. So if we didn't know how to drop it by this time, we never would. So the day before, we had a briefing in the morning, and then they told you to go back and get some sleep because you're going to take off at 2:45 a.m. Everything started at 2:45. And so then you went back and to get some sleep, and nobody slept. How do they expect to tell you you're going out and drop the first atomic bomb and then go get some sleep? At 8 o'clock at night, they came and got us finally and then took us over and gave us the final breakfast in this sort of business. I call it the final breakfast, so they call it the mission breakfast. And then over to the final briefing where they gave you the latest metro data, told you where all the air sea rescue ships were and everything of that type. Any final things that they needed to know. So then we finally finished all that. We got in the airplane and took off. Very simple.
I mean, once you got up in the plane, what was it like? How were you feeling?
It was easy because everything went exactly according to plan. There wasn't a surprise in a whole bunch. And with what we had prepared for and had been expecting and everything of that type all this time, you could see the coast of Japan from a good 200 miles away. Well, maybe 100 miles away. You could see the city of Hiroshima from 50 miles away. So you just went in and turned on to the bomb run, and by this time it was in the bombardier's hands, and you sat there and waited for the drop. And when the drop came, the plane surged because you'd suddenly lost 9,400 pounds, and Tibbets took over manual control again and made the turn to get away from the bomb. The biggest thing that we were concerned about was, is this bomb going to work? Because this was a bomb that had never been tested. This was a uranium-235 bomb that had never been tested. The one they tested was a plutonium bomb. So was it going to work or wasn't going to work? And it took 45 seconds from the time the bomb left the airplane until it exploded. Everybody was sitting there timing it in some way, shape, or form. I had a watch, so I knew what the time was. The other people were counting 1001, 1002, and so forth. And suddenly the bomb went off, and you saw a bright flash of light in the airplane, so you knew the thing had worked. And the only question then was, what was it going to do to the airplane? So we were going away from it at this time. We got putting distance between us and the bomb, kept that up. After a very short time, we got the first shock wave, which was measured about 3.5 Gs. You're up there in Washington, you know all these military people. You know what a 3G is and everything of that type. So it doesn't seem like much to a fighter pilot, but if you're in a B-29 at 30,000 feet, it seems like a hell of a job. So Then we turned around after we weren't sure we weren't going to get any more shock waves. We turned around to look what had happened, and the shock wave of the city of Hiroshima was completely covered with smoke and dust. And you knew a tremendous amount of damage had been done underneath that cloud there and everything, but you could not see what it was.
When they tested the first atomic bomb in New Mexico, as you mentioned, Robert Oppenheimer, who's of course the mastermind behind the Manhattan Project, I read a quote from him and he said, few people cried, most were silent. How did you feel when that bomb detonated?
I was happy it worked. That's number one. We had been in a long war. We had been attacked by the Japanese. The Japanese people were not nice people in those days. My next-door neighbor, who was a prisoner of war all the time, has more stories about this to tell than I can tell. But we had the Bataan Death March, all the casualties we took down in the Solomons and this sort of thing. The policy of the United States government at that time was to subdue the nation of Japan. And I was willing to do anything I could do to help that out. And that was my policy also, the country was trying to subdue Japan, and I was trying to also subdue Japan. Let me make one comment here. The Japanese you know today are not the Japanese we fought during World War II. The Japanese of today are nice people and everything of that type. We've had Japanese students living with us in our homes out in California for many, many years. And I couldn't ask for better. But the Japanese during World War II were not that nice of people. And that's all I'll say about them.
Do you think that the Japanese people will ever be able to forgive the Americans after all this destruction in both Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Well, I don't know if they will or not. If I had been living in Hiroshima or Nagasaki at that particular time, I probably wouldn't forgive them either, because those people suffered an awful lot. But whether they will accept it or not, dropping the atomic bomb saved their lives and our lives, Japanese lives. If we had had to invade Japan, the Japanese casualties would have been much, 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 much higher. And our casualties would have been terrific. They're still giving out Purple Hearts that were made to give out in the invasion of Japan. We still haven't used up all the Purple Hearts that were manufactured at that time. It was not a nice war. 50 million people got killed during World War II, and they all have bad stories to tell about it.
In hindsight, do you think that there was any way to avoid using the atomic weapon, any other options that would have achieved the same goal?
Three main options. One was to put a blockade around Japan and starve the people to death. How do you starve people to death that are already living on 1,000 calories? You can't do it. Then the other two options were drop the atomic weapons or put a full-scale invasion into Japan. The atomic weapons would have resulted in less casualties overall than if the invasion of Japan would have done. And if you ask any GI, ask anybody that was in the service over the Pacific, and they love the atomic bomb and everything. My next door neighbor came over here when he found out what I did at dropping the atomic bomb. And he came over here at 6 o'clock one morning pounding on my door. Says, I just found out what you did. You saved my life. And I says, well, you pound on my door at 6 o'clock again. I won't save it. That's all I can say. But everybody who's in the Pacific at the time will come up to me and say, you saved my life.
Do you regret being on that mission that dropped the first ever atomic bomb?
I regret we ever had to have a mission. I regret every mission I had over Europe and everything of that type. I dropped a lot of bombs over there that killed people and probably killed civilians. But do I regret the atomic mission? I regret we had to do it. There's a fellow here the other day, and what was it? He was saying that the Japanese should apologize to us for making us drop the atomic bomb. That was a new twist on things I've never heard before. But I regret that we had to do it, but I think we had to do it in order to end the war with a minimum loss of life.
So, of course, the issue of nuclear warfare is still very relevant today as the threat of nuclear war still lingers. Is there anything that you would like to say to the politicians today that are in control of the world's nuclear stockpiles?
I say that any politician, any diplomat, anybody in any area of authority today, I would like never to see another atomic weapon used, but I'm afraid we're going to. We will not see it by Russia, or we will not see it by the major powers or anything else. I dread the day when the terrorists are going to get nuclear weapons, because they are not near as thoughtful of the consequences of nuclear bombings as we are, as major powers are. And they will toss them around like matchsticks, I'm afraid.
My last question for you. If World War III broke out today, God forbid, and you were given the same order, they said, go drop an atomic bomb on whatever city, would you do it again?
If everything was exactly the same as it was then. That's the point. I know it's not possible to really duplicate things that precisely, but if the same situation existed again, exactly as it had back in 1945, yes, I would go on it. I would volunteer for it, as a matter of fact. I'd want to go on it.